Australia, you think you know it. Sun, beaches, kangaroos, and the world's most dangerous, everything trying to kill you at any given moment. That's the version most people carry around. But here's the thing about Australia, the real Australia, it is so much weirder, more extraordinary, and more genuinely mind-bending than the postcard version. This is a continent that lost its prime minister in the ocean, that once declared war on birds, that has a town where every resident lives underground to escape the heat. And those are just the warm-up acts. Today we're counting down the top 5 most surprising facts about Australia. Facts that will make you question everything you thought you knew about this place. Let's go. Number 5. Australia once lost a war to birds. Let's be very clear about this. In 1932, the Australian military, armed with machine guns, went to battle against emus. Actual emus, large, flightless, frankly ridiculous-looking birds, and the emus won. Here is how this happened. After World War I, the Australian government resettled thousands of returned soldiers on farmland in Western Australia's wheat belt as a reward for their service. These men had survived the trenches of Gallipoli and the Western Front. They were tough, experienced, and battle-hardened. They were not, however, prepared for what arrived in 1932. 20,000 emus, migrating from the inland in a giant horde, descending on the farmland, trampling crops, smashing fences, and causing absolute agricultural chaos. The farmers, many of them already struggling through the Great Depression, were at their breaking point. Their solution, they asked the defense minister to send in the army. And so, on the 2nd of November 1932, 3 members of the Royal Australian Artillery arrived at the Campion district of Western Australia. Their commander was Major G.P.W. Meredith. Their weapons were 2 Lewis light machine guns, the same weapons that had mowed down soldiers across Europe barely 15 years earlier. Their ammunition was 10,000 rounds. Their enemy was a bird with a walnut-sized brain. And the birds won. On the first day, the soldiers attempted to herd 50 emus into a firing line. The emus scattered. The guns opened fire. The emus ran in every direction. After thousands of rounds and an embarrassing amount of time, the soldiers had killed 12. When they tried to pursue the emus in trucks, the birds outran them. When they set an ambush at a water hole, one of the machine guns jammed. When they attempted a second deployment, an emu ran directly into the gun carriage, partially disabling it. One ornithologist described the emu's battlefield tactics, and I am not making this up, as being organized. Scouts would post themselves on high ground, and when they spotted a soldier, they would signal the rest of the mob to scatter in different directions. The major commanding the operation later said, and I quote directly, "If we had a military division with the bullet-carrying capacity of these birds, it would face any army in the world." Members of the Australian House of Representatives openly mocked the campaign. They joked that if anyone deserved medals from this conflict, it was the emus. By the time the operation was officially called off, the soldiers had fired over 10,000 rounds of ammunition and killed fewer than 1,000 birds out of 20,000. The emus were declared, by public consensus and common sense, the victors. The Great Emu War remains one of the most uniquely Australian things that has ever occurred on Australian soil. Number 4. There is a town in Australia where roughly half the entire population lives underground. Not metaphorically, not in basements. Underground, in homes carved directly into the rock. Welcome to Coober, Pedy. Coober, Pedy sits in the South Australian desert, about 850 kilometers north of Adelaide, in what is essentially the middle of absolutely nowhere. It is so remote that the nearest major city is an 8-hour drive. The landscape looks, famously, like the surface of Mars, which is why several movies, including Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome, have been filmed there. The town came to exist in 1915 when a 14-year-old boy named Willie Hutchison, exploring with his father's prospecting party, found something far more valuable than gold. He found opals, extraordinary, iridescent opals, the kind that shimmer and shift through a rainbow of colors depending on how the light hits them. Word spread, miners poured in, and Coober Pedy became, and remains today, the opal capital of the world, producing roughly 70% of the global supply. Now here's where the story gets interesting. The outback heat in this part of South Australia is not merely hot. It is hostile. Summer temperatures regularly hit 50 degrees Celsius, that's 122 Fahrenheit, and have been known to go higher. Locals claim to have seen birds fall dead from the sky on the hottest days. Before the town planted a deliberate tree-growing program. The tallest tree in Coober Pedy was a sculpture welded together from scrap metal. The early miners, most of them familiar with digging holes, because that is literally what they did for a living, noticed something about the caves they had already carved out while prospecting for opals. The sandstone was a natural insulator, while the surface baked at scorching temperatures. The interior of a dugout remained a cool and stable 23 degrees Celsius year-round. In both summer and winter, no air conditioning needed, no heating bills. So they moved in. Today, roughly half of Coober Pedy's population lives underground. Not in shacks or shelters, in full homes. Modern underground houses that can span more than 4,000 square feet. With multiple bedrooms, kitchens, living rooms, and bathrooms all carved into the sandstone. And it doesn't stop at houses. There are underground churches, including a Serbian Orthodox church with intricate sandstone carvings of saints on the walls. Underground hotels, underground bookshops, underground restaurants, even an underground pool hall. The name Coober Pedy, by the way, comes from the Aboriginal Kakatha language. It translates roughly as white man in a hole. Honestly, a more accurate name has never been given to anywhere. Number 3. The first moon landing, one of the most watched television broadcasts in human history, was relayed to the world primarily through a sheep paddock in rural New South Wales. On July 20, 1969, when Neil Armstrong stepped out of the Eagle lunar module and onto the surface of the moon, approximately 600 million people around the world watched it live on television. The images that made it possible, those grainy but extraordinary pictures of a human being standing on another world, were transmitted through 3 tracking stations. 2 were in the United States. The third was the Honeysuckle Creek tracking station, located outside Canberra, Australia. The first 7 minutes of footage broadcast worldwide came primarily from Honeysuckle Creek. The station was perfectly positioned to receive the signal at the moment Armstrong first stepped out, because of its location in the southern hemisphere. When Armstrong's now famous words, "One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind," were heard around the world, the signal that carried them came, in large part, through a valley in the Australian bush. A tracking station in rural Australia was the relay point for the most important television broadcast in human history. Most people who watched that broadcast had no idea. Most people still don't. There is a second, equally charming chapter to this story. The Parkes Observatory in New South Wales, known affectionately as the Dish, also played a crucial role. The giant radio telescope at Parkes took over signal reception a few hours into the moonwalk and transmitted the bulk of the broadcast from that point onward. The moon landing was an American triumph, but Australia made sure the world could see it. Number 2. Australia's Prime Minister disappeared in the ocean in 1967 and was never seen again. Harold Holt had been Prime Minister of Australia since January 1966. He was a popular, experienced politician who was known, among many other things, for being a keen and enthusiastic swimmer and skydiver. He loved the ocean, he swam regularly, and was known to friends and colleagues as entirely comfortable in the water. On the 17th of December 1967, Harold Holt drove to Cheviot Beach near Portsea, Victoria. The conditions that day were rough, strong swells, churning surf, the kind of conditions that would make most sensible people stay on shore. Holt's companions expressed concern. He waved them off. He had swum in worse. He walked into the water, and he was never seen again. No body was ever recovered. No official explanation was ever definitively established. The most likely cause of death was drowning. The sea conditions were severe, and even experienced swimmers can be overwhelmed by the ocean. But because no body was found, and because there was never a confirmed account of exactly what happened, conspiracy theories flourished for decades. He had faked his death. He had been picked up by a Chinese submarine. He had been abducted. He had secretly defected. None of these theories have ever had a shred of credible evidence. But the absence of a body, combined with the sheer extraordinariness of the event, the sitting prime minister of a nation simply vanishing into the sea, meant the speculation never entirely went away. Australia's official response was characteristically, magnificently Australian. Several years after Holt's disappearance, a memorial swimming centre was opened in Melbourne. It was named the Harold Holt Memorial Swimming Centre, because if you are going to mourn a prime minister who drowned, the least you can do is honour him with a pool. And the number one most surprising fact about Australia. Number 1. Australia is simultaneously the 6th largest country in the world by area, bigger than the entire continent of Europe, and yet 90% of its population lives within 50 kilometers of the coast. The vast interior, an area larger than India, is home to fewer than 500,000 people. Australia is one of the most urbanized nations on Earth. More than 80% of Australians live in cities or large towns. The outback, the red heart of the continent, the place most associated with Australia's identity worldwide, is one of the least densely populated places in the human world. But here is where this fact becomes genuinely extraordinary. Inside that almost empty interior, there are things that defy imagination. The dingo fence, a single continuous fence that stretches 5,614 kilometers, making it the longest fence in the world, and longer than the Great Wall of China. Built to keep dingoes out of the southeastern pastoral regions, it remains functional and is still patrolled and maintained by hand today. Uluru, the enormous sandstone monolith in the Northern Territory that rises 348 meters from the flat desert floor. What most people don't know is that what you see above ground is not the full picture. Approximately 2.5 kilometers of rock extend underground, connecting deep within the earth to the Kata-T-Juta Formation several kilometers away. What looks like a single island of rock rising from the desert is actually the exposed tip of an underground mountain range. And then there is Lake Hillier, a lake in Western Australia that is, and there is no other way to say this, bubblegum pink. Not slightly rose-tinted, not pinkish at certain times of day. Bright, vivid, cartoon pink, caused by a combination of salt-loving algae and specific microorganisms that produce a rose pigment. It is surrounded by white salt crystals and green eucalyptus forest, making it look like someone reached into a child's imagination and dropped a lake in the middle of the Australian coast. The interior of Australia contains an underground city, a pink lake, the longest fence on Earth, a sacred monolith that is mostly underground, and it is almost entirely empty of people, who have all arranged themselves with remarkable consistency along the edges of the continent, looking out at the sea. It is possibly the most extraordinary piece of real estate on Earth, and most of the people who live there have never been to most of it. Australia, sun, beaches, kangaroos, and the world's most dangerous, everything trying to kill you. But also an underground town with churches and hotels carved into sandstone. A prime minister who dissolved into the ocean and got a swimming center named after him. A continent that relayed the moon landing to the world through a paddock in the bush. A mountain lake the color of bubblegum. A fence longer than the Great Wall of China. A rock that is mostly underground. And a war fought with machine guns that was lost to birds. If you made it up, nobody would believe you. But that's Australia. It doesn't need to be made up. Reality is doing just fine. If you enjoyed this video, hit subscribe and drop a comment below what surprised you most. And if you're from Australia and I got something wrong, please know that I am deeply, genuinely afraid of your wildlife and I am counting on your mercy. See you in the next one.